My name is Micheline Saint-Hilaire, and I'm involved with the Catholic Health Corporation of Manitoba. A year ago now, we launched the Compassion Project, and its aim is to explore ways to nurture and strengthen compassion in health and human services. Now, compassion is said to be a fundamental human value, and one that is really at the heart of human and health services. And compassion is said to bind us together, it inspires us. And at the same time, it can also be elusive and difficult to live at a personal and at an institutional level. So what an opportunity we have with you all here today in the context of the Compassion Grand Rounds to explore, to uncover the ways in which we can nurture and strengthen compassion. So I'd invite Dawn McDonald, coordinator of the mindfulness program with the Catholic Health Corporation and St. Boniface Hospital, to introduce our guest speaker today. Dawn?
That's Micheline Saint-Hilaire. Thank you, Micheline. I'm going to just take a moment to take it all in, to see so many faces, to see all of us together. How honored we are that you have all chosen to take the time to be with us here today. And there's something so compelling about this topic. Maybe it's that we're starting to pay attention to the awakening of our quivering hearts as our minds and bodies work so diligently in service. It's truly remarkable that we are all here together today. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce to you our guest speaker, Dr. Kristin Neff. Kristin studied communications as an undergraduate at the University of California at Los Angeles, and she did her graduate work at the University of California at Berkeley, studying moral development with Dr. Elliot Turiel? Yes. Her dissertation research took her to Mysore, India, where she examined children's moral reasoning. That's where she also met her husband, Rupert Isaacson. She spent 2 years of postdoctoral study with Dr. Susan Harder at Denver University, studying issues of authenticity and self-concept development. Her current position at the University of Texas at Austin started in 1999, and she was promoted to associate professor in 2006. And if any of you are familiar with that tenure process, it's quite interesting. During Kristin's last year of graduate school in 1997, she became interested in Buddhism, and she's been practicing meditation in the Insight meditation tradition ever since. While doing her postdoctoral work, she decided to conduct research on self-compassion, a central construct in Buddhist psychology, and one that had not been examined empirically. In addition to her pioneering research into self-compassion, she has developed an 8-week program to teach self-compassion skills. The program, co-created with her colleague, Chris Gemmer at Harvard, is called Mindful Self-Compassion. Kristin has a new book called Self-Compassion, and it's been published by William Morrow, and it's available outside if you're interested in purchasing a copy later after the talk. Kristin lives in the countryside in Elgin, Texas, with her husband, Rupert, an author and a human rights activist, and with her young son, Rowan. And last night we were gifted with the opportunity to view a documentary film called The Horse Boy at Health Sciences with our colleagues in spiritual health services there. It was beautiful. Thank you for that. So I take the time now to just allow Kristin to come up, and thank you for coming, Kristin. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you. That's what we do.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me all right? The levels? Not really? Can they boost it and back? Can you hear me better now? Okay, great. Is that all right? Okay. Well, it's so lovely to be here to talk to you. I so support what Don and Micheline are doing, bringing compassion into healthcare. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, self-compassion, and also particularly self-compassion for caregivers. So most of my talk today will be about self-compassion itself, because actually a lot of people, it's not a familiar term in our culture. So defining it, saying what it is and what it isn't, and going over a little bit of the research on this topic. But then at the end, I'm going to come back to this issue of self-compassion for caregivers. Because as you know, a lot of you are caregivers. I assume there's therapists and nurses and doctors and various people involved in healthcare professions. People push themselves really hard. I've noticed personally that a lot of the most caring, giving people are incredibly hard on themselves. They actually often criticize themselves for not giving enough. And it tends to lead to distress and oftentimes burnout. It's kind of unsustainable. So I'm going to try to make the argument, or at least suggest, that self-compassion is a really good way for caregivers to sustain their own health and sustain their own open heart when they're dealing with the suffering of others. But to start out, I'm going to start in the beginning. As Don said, I did my postdoctoral work with a woman named Susan Harder, and she's actually one of America's leading self-esteem researchers. And while working with her, I became very familiar with some of the problems with self-esteem. So I'm going to start there because my early work was designed to offer self-compassion as an alternative to self-esteem. All right, so as you all know, there's been probably thousands of self-help books written about self-esteem, certainly in the 80s, 90s, probably starting in the 70s. There was a lot of emphasis on we need high self-esteem, we need to teach our kids high self-esteem. Psychologists really thought self-esteem was the answer to all our problems. And part of that is because if you have low self-esteem, if you hate yourself, if you think you're unworthy, you're going to have poor mental health. You'll probably be anxious and depressed and have a lot of problems. So people assume that what we need to do is just the opposite of that. We need to have people like themselves, think they're great, feel really good about themselves. In the schools, I'm not sure what it was like in Canada, but in the United States, we had a very big push in the schools to raise kids' self-esteem. You know, good job, lots of gold star stickies telling kids how great they were. Coming from a very good reason, a good-hearted reason to help kids like themselves and not hate themselves. Unfortunately, as psychologists have been really unpackaging over the last decade, there are some kind of insidious downsides to this need to feel high self-esteem. It's not so much that it's bad to have high self-esteem, it's really how you get it and what you do to keep it, where the problems come in. Okay, the need to be special and above average, right? So psychologists have established that in order to have high self-esteem, we all need to feel special and above average. And actually, a lot of psychologists use the term Lake-Wobegon effect to describe the psychological finding that most people think they are above average on just about every culturally valued trait you give them. Apparently 98% of drivers think they're better than other drivers. Even the majority of drivers who recently caused a car accident still think they're better than others. So people think, you know, they're nicer, they're funnier, they're more intelligent, just about anything you throw at them. And part of that is because, at least in American culture, and I suspect it's throughout most of the West, to be average is not okay. So if I said to Don, you know, oh, Don, yeah, your outfit is average. You'd be devastated, right? You'd feel that'd be an utter failure because we all have to be above average. And if we just think about this logically, it is technically, by definition, impossible for us all to be above average at the same time. So that leads to a lot of jockeying. We like to see ourselves as better than we actually are. And we actually like to see others as worse than they actually are. I mean, if you look in the checkout stands in the supermarket and we see all these pictures of the stars, oh my God, gained 5 pounds, and you know, we like to put them down, at least a lot of the gossip magazines do. Part of that is a way to buffer our self-esteem, right, to feel better than other people. So in the United States, a big problem with the self-esteem movement is narcissism. Okay, this need to feel special and above average to be number one, it's not okay to be number two, has led to a generation of narcissists. And there's a great book, 2 books called Generation Me and another one called The Narcissism Epidemic by Jean Twenge. They've been tracking narcissism levels in college students for the last 20 years, and they are at the highest levels ever recorded. Even just in my 12 years of teaching at the University of Texas, you can see among the undergraduates this sense of entitlement. You know, what, I gotta be, that's not right. And you know, this sense that, you know, they think they're too special. And if you've ever been around narcissistic people, or God forbid, had one as your relationship partner, it is there's a lot of problems with narcissism. It's very self-centered, very fragile egos can't take any criticism, and people are really talking about the fact that this is a problem that we've created in American society that we need to address. Another feature, the need to have high self-esteem, again, feel you're better than others, is social comparison. I don't know if any of you have seen this film, Mean Girls. It's a fabulous film about the high school dynamics and how girls become popular. It's actually based on a sociological study. Someone went into a high school and said, how do these girls get there? How do they jockey for a position? And what they do is, well, obviously they've got to look like this, but often there's this practice of insulting the girls that are less popular. In this film, they had a burn book where they wrote insults about other girls, but of course now this is all done on Facebook, right, and other social media. So there's a lot of just meanness that goes on as people try to feel good about themselves by putting other people down. Bullying and prejudice, actually. You might assume that bullies and people who are prejudiced have low self-esteem. In fact, they find just the opposite, that for a lot of people, again, having power over someone, if you're a bully, or being prejudiced is the way you get your self-esteem. You know, my racial group is better than yours, my ethnic group is better than yours, maybe this will become, well, at least in the States, you know, my political party is better than yours. We identify with our groups, so if we want to feel good about ourselves, we have to feel our groups are better than other groups. And of course, I don't need to tell you the problems that come from this dynamic. Ego defensiveness, right? Think about the last time you had an argument with someone. If someone insults us or there's some conflict that might make us look bad, we tend to get angry and we like to blame the other person. It's not my fault, it's your fault, right? And a lot of those dynamics and arguments and relationship conflicts come from both neither party wants to admit they're wrong because it makes them feel bad about themselves. It feels a lot better to blame the other person. And you can see when you're having an argument with someone, you aren't saying, I'm so angry. It's like, I'm so angry. And you stand tall and you feel very self-righteous. And a lot of self-righteous anger comes from this dynamic, the need to have high self-esteem. Another issue is that our self-esteem is often very contingent on success in domains that are important to us, right? So I've got to be very good at the things that I value. For women, actually, the #1 domain in which women place their esteem is attractiveness, thinness, the perception that other people think they're attractive. For men, it's attractiveness, but also things like work success, etc. So the problem, of course, when you put all your, you might say, self-esteem eggs in one basket, is that it's great when you succeed, you feel on top of the world, everything's going great, but the second you fail, then you feel like an utter failure, right? So your self-esteem goes up and down. And psychologists are actually starting to argue now that even more important than whether you have high or low self-esteem is how stable it is, right? If it goes up and down all the time, it's actually very psychologically destabilizing. Some people argue it's better to have low self-esteem that's constant because at least it's the devil you know, right? You can work around it. So there's a lot of problems with, again, it's really the pursuit of high self-esteem. So when I started practicing Buddhist meditation and they talked about self-compassion, I thought, wow, self-compassion, what's that? I've never heard of that before. And then I did my postdoc. I really thought, this is another way to feel good about yourself that doesn't require feeling better than others. And that I just really, from my own personal experience at that point, came to understand that we don't need to feel better than others. We don't need to feel special above average. In fact, there's something very beautiful about saying, I am human, I am average, I do have flaws like everyone else, and a sense of real connectedness can come from that. So that's when I got really interested in self-compassion. And as Don said, at the time, there hadn't been any empirical work on it, and no one had even really defined what self-compassion was in the academic setting. I didn't come up with this idea, right? This is an ancient idea. It comes from Buddhism. So what I did is I just read every book I can get my hands on, and not just Buddhist books, from other spiritual traditions too, but that was the tradition I was coming from. So I tried to say, what is this self-compassion thing? How do I give it an operational definition that I can then measure, which is my ultimate goal? So according to my perspective, self-compassion is composed of three main components. It's being kind to yourself, recognizing common humanity, and also mindfulness. Right? And I'll go through each one of these separately. Okay, so self-kindness, and in some ways this is the most obvious aspect of self-compassion, is treating yourself kindly, gently, in a very supportive manner, not tearing yourself to shreds with harsh criticism and judging yourself as a bad person. It's really just like a good friend would act towards a friend they cared about. It's treating yourself in the same way as you would treat a good friend. Actually, though, in talking to people, maybe some of you can identify with this, sometimes I ask people to write down the language they use towards themselves if they failed or feel inadequate. And I say, would you ever say this to a friend? In fact, would you ever say this to a total stranger? And most people say that they are harsher with themselves than almost anyone in their lives. Somehow they feel permission to be mean to themselves. So the idea with self-compassion is you really try to recognize the suffering caused by your own self-criticism and replace it with much kinder, supportive, gentle language. But importantly with self-compassion, it's more than just not judging yourself. It involves active self-soothing, doing things that actually calm you down, that comfort yourself, just as a mother would soothe and comfort a distressed child, taking the time to, well, talk about it, activate our caregiving system. I'm just going to give you a little taste of this now, tiny little experiential exercise. Okay, so if, you should have room. So I'd like you all, if you don't mind, to put your arms out in front of you and clench your fists really hard. Okay, and hold them there for a few seconds. All right, this is what self-judgment feels like, right? Tight, rigid, restricted, painful. And then let go of your clasped fists. And that's what letting go of self-judgment feels like, a lot more freedom, a lot more space. But then, I'm trying to tip my mic, put your hands gently and soothingly over your heart. And just really let yourself feel the warmth of your hands. Okay, and that's what self-kindness feels like. It's actually the proactive soothing and comforting of yourself when you're suffering. There is actually some physiological reasons why that feels so good, which I'll come to later. All right, so there's self-kindness, but a lot of people ask, well, how is self-compassion different than, let's say, self-acceptance? They're very overlapping constructs, but I would argue self-compassion has a couple more elements. Very important is this sense of common humanity. Okay, so when you suffer, you fail, or you make a mistake, self-compassion frames that in light of the shared human experience. We are all human. Whoever said that you weren't supposed to make mistakes? There's no one here in this auditorium who signed a contract before birth saying, I will be perfect and my life will be perfect. And yet, most of us, when something goes wrong, either in our lives or we mess up in some way, we think, this is not supposed to be happening. I'm really upset by it. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people feel very isolated when they suffer or when they make a mistake or they feel inadequate. As if, it's not really logical, but everyone else in the world seems to be doing just fine, and it's just me who's messed up or has this difficult experience. So with self-compassion, you frame your experience of suffering in light of the shared human experience. And so actually what happens is you feel connected to others in your suffering and in your failure. as opposed to feeling isolated from them. And I think that's one of the, and the research suggests as well, one of the key reasons why self-compassion is so psychologically beneficial. Okay? Imperfection is part of the human experience. We shouldn't expect anything otherwise. All right. And then the last component is mindfulness. There's been a lot of buzz about mindfulness, a lot of research showing that it's very effective for reducing stress, for mental health, for physical health as well. So you need to be mindful with your suffering if you're going to give yourself compassion. So first of all, you have to be aware of your suffering. You have to notice it to give yourself compassion. At the same time, if you run away with it in a very over-exaggerated, dramatic manner, that's not mindfulness either. Mindfulness sees things as they are in the present moment, no more, no less. Now, some people say, what do you mean being mindful of your suffering? Of course, I'm kind of too aware of my suffering. In fact, it's often not the case. First of all, when people are lost in self-criticism, when they're identifying with the role of self-critic, they're often so, again, lost in the role of critic that they're not really in touch with the incredible suffering they're causing themselves through their self-criticism. They feel that they deserve it somehow. They have no empathy or compassion for the part of themselves that is being criticized. And even if something goes wrong in your life, it's not your fault. Your mother's sick, or you get in a big car crash. Oftentimes what happens is people go straight into problem-solving mode. I need to fix this problem, and they don't pause to say, this is really difficult. I need some TLC right now, right? They just go straight into fixing the problem, and they aren't in touch with their own suffering. So some people ask, well, why isn't self-compassion more prevalent in Western culture? It's actually, I'm really gratified to see it starting to enter the common parlance, but it really hasn't been part of the tradition in most Western cultures. So I have one hypothesis, totally, it's not supported by research, but this is one hypothesis, right? In Western culture, we have the John Wayne ideal, strong, stoic, silent, tough. And a lot of people think that self-compassion is soft. I've had some comments that go, great, teach people self-compassion, we'll have a nation of sissies. People think it's, weak, soft and weak. But of course, compassion can be incredibly powerful. Some of the most powerful leaders we've had in world history were involved in great social change. Their strength came from compassion. So compassion is not at all weak. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. Compassion towards yourself sometimes is a very powerful force for change. It's not passive. Another problem is confusion with self-pity. It's annoying to be around someone lost in the throes of self-pity. Why is it annoying? Because at that moment, it's a very egocentric emotion, self-pity. Woe is me, poor me. It's not saying everybody suffers. It's not including you, in this human experience. It's saying, poor me, feel sorry for me. It's playing victim mode. And typically, it's exaggerating the extent of suffering. So because of the common humanity components and mindfulness components of self-compassion, it really keeps it from delving into self-pity and keeps it as something much more inclusive, much more balanced. This is probably the number one reason I find for why people resist the idea of self-compassion is they confuse it with self-indulgence or just giving the self-pleasure, But if I was self-compassionate, I would just skip work and stay home, watch TV reruns, eat ice cream all day. I would, again, be really soft on myself. The word compassion really means concern with the alleviation of suffering. So when you have self-compassion, you're concerned with your own suffering, you want to alleviate your suffering, and you want health and well-being for yourself. Self-indulgence, the reason we call it self-indulgence and not self-care is because it actually is harming yourself. I mean, if you skip work and watch TV and eat ice cream all day, you would be harming yourself. A really good example is a compassionate parent dealing with their child. Sure, your kid would like to eat ice cream all day. My son would just eat ice cream morning to evening. But if you care about your child and you don't want them to suffer, you say, no, you got to eat your vegetables. You got to go to bed on time. You can't eat all this sugar, right? So if you care about yourself, you aren't going to be self-indulgent if that self-indulgence would lead to some sort of self-harm. Another confusion that comes up a lot is making excuses. Do you have that expression in Canada, the dog ate my homework? Okay, good. You know, the idea that you're just letting yourself off the hook. I get a lot of comments when I write about this topic. Oh, great, you just say it's only human, and you just blow off what you've done. In fact, one of the things that happens with self-compassion is you have greater self-clarity. If it's safe to admit your mistakes, if you know that you aren't going to, hit yourself with self-criticism by saying, oh, I failed, I made a mistake, I did it, it gives you incredible emotional safety to own up to your responsibilities. And so we've done some research showing, for instance, when people talk about their greatest weakness or some sort of personal flaws, they're a lot less anxious about it. They feel more safe talking about their weaknesses. And in fact, people who are more self-compassionate are more willing to take responsibility for past mistakes than others. Okay, again, if you're trying to protect your self-esteem, you want to blame others. If you have self-compassion, it's safe to say, I did do that, I'm really sorry. Okay, so this is another big stumbling block. A lot of people really, it's very hard to get over this one. They really think they need their self-criticism to motivate themselves. Okay, it used to be in some religious traditions, they actually did self-flagellation as kind of penance and as a spiritual practice. And people think that, again, if they aren't self-critical, they aren't going to grow, they aren't going to change, they aren't going to be motivated to achieve their goals. In fact, what the research shows is just the opposite. If you're very self-critical, you end up being less motivated. One reason is because if you're very self-critical, you're almost inevitably depressed. We all know that depression is not exactly a get-up-and-go mindset, right? It undermines your drive to achieve. It also undermines your self-confidence. And again, research shows that self-confidence is incredibly important in success. It also makes you afraid of failing, so you often give up trying. Because you know if you try and you fail, you're going to be met with this barrage of self-criticism. And again, I think it's so much easier to see when we think about how a good, compassionate parent treats their child when they have a failure. So let's say, this father, his son comes home, he's in high school with a failing grade in math, okay? So one approach would be the criticism approach. You are so stupid and lazy, you'll never amount to anything, what a loser. You cringe. Actually, some parents do treat their kids that way, and they grow up with a lot of psychological problems. That's not going to motivate the child. The kid's going to not want to go to math class, they're going to be nervous, they're going to be anxious, they're going to be stressed about it. The best way to motivate that child is to say, you have to admit, we need to get you better grades because you want to go to college, and this is going to harm you in the long run if you don't get your math grades up. But I support you, I believe in you, I know you can do it. I will give you the help, whatever help I can to help you get through this. Maybe a new study schedule, we hire a tutor, something like that. But a supportive, kind parent is going to allow their child to be much more motivated than one who's just very belittling and critical. And it seems easy to see it with parents, but somehow we don't get that message with ourselves. We really think our self-criticism works. I can tell you the research shows that it doesn't. One way I like to frame this, even though it may be a little self-helpy, but I think it's very true, that the motivational power of self-compassion comes from care, and the motivational power of self-criticism comes from fear, right? If you care about yourself and you want to thrive and be happy and healthy, that's what makes you motivated to try and to achieve your goals. Self-criticism, the reason you try to achieve your goals is because you're afraid of what's going to happen if you fail. And I like to think that love is more powerful than fear. I think that's really the dynamic going on here. There is a little bit of data, so I'm not just making all this up. I'm actually an increasing amount of data, not just a little bit. So just for example, people who are more self-compassionate have more intrinsic motivation, which means their motivation comes from the inside. They've got a stronger desire to learn and grow. The personal standards in terms of how high people aim, self-compassionate people aim just as high as anyone else. They just aren't as upset by their failure. And one of the consequences of that is they have less fear of failure. They're more willing to take risks, and when they do fail, they're more likely to pick themselves up and try again. There's also some increasing amount of research now looking at health behaviors. Okay? So people who have more self-compassion are more likely to exercise, especially for the right reasons, not just to look good to other people, but because you want to feel healthy. It helps them stick to their diets, helps people quit smoking, practice safe sex, and visit their doctor regularly. Okay, so if you care about yourself, it translates into healthy behaviors. There's a lot of research now, and this is just a little smattering done in more and more countries, showing that self-compassion is strongly linked to well-being. And I'm talking the effect sizes are very powerful. So there's a lot of positive impact. People with self-compassion are happy with their lives. They tend to be wiser, more authentic. They cope better with stress, and they have more self-confidence, curiosity, happiness, optimism. There's actually one study that just came out that found that if you help people be more self-compassionate, they become more creative. It kind of frees up their mental space to take on creative projects. They often have less anxiety and depression. Incredibly strong negative relationship between self-compassion and anxiety and depression. It's very powerful. Less stress, rumination, perfectionism, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting, the PTSD symptoms, a lot of the vet hospitals in the United States are now teaching their vets with PTSD about self-compassion and finding it very, very helpful. One of my kind of pet projects has been to do studies comparing self-esteem and self-compassion, what they differentially predict. And as you would expect, at least according to the theory, is that compared to self-esteem, self-compassion is associated with a lot fewer social comparisons. You don't need to feel better than others to feel good about yourself. Less ego-defensive anger, less self-consciousness. It's funny, we call it self-compassion, but ironically, when you frame your experience in light of the human experience, you're actually less self-focused than you are with saying, I'm great, I'm number one. The self-worth of self-compassionate people is less contingent. In other words, I'm worthy of care because I'm valuable, because I'm a human being, not because I have success on a particular day. Self-compassion says we have our good days and we have our bad days. All this is normal and natural. And we did one study tracking the sense of state self-worth at the time, how valuable you feel over 8 months. And we found that a lot of people with high self-esteem, their self-worth would go up and down depending on their latest success or failure. Self-compassionate people had a very stable sense of self-worth. I mean, you're always human, you're always flawed, win-win, right? You can't ever lose that. And in fact, that's one of the great things about self-compassion is it steps in precisely when self-esteem falls down. And that's when you fail or feel inadequate in some way. And then also, very nice, powerful data showing that self-compassion has no association with narcissism, where self-esteem has a pretty high association with narcissism. Now, the reason it's not negative, of course, is that if you hate yourself and you're very self-critical, you aren't being narcissistic either. So they're completely orthogonal dimensions. All right. I want to talk a little bit about some of the underpinnings of all this, the physiological underpinnings. There's some great work by Paul Gilbert, who also studies self-compassion. He's in the UK. And he has this evolutionary model that explains how these different systems evolved, self-esteem, self-criticism, and self-compassion. And he argues, and again, there's physiological data to support this, that the desire for self-esteem is natural. I mean, we shouldn't beat ourselves up for wanting to be number one. This is part of our evolutionary heritage, right? People, the alpha male, or the people who are, the matriarch, they got more accesses to food, resources. You're more likely to survive when you're top dog, right? And our physiology releases dopamine and really energizes us when we succeed. When you win, it's like, yes, right? Feels really good. That's part of our physiology. There's a reason for that, right? Because evolutionarily, like I said, it was a selection advantage. Self-criticism taps into the threat defense system, right? So when you criticize yourself, what happens is, and I tell people not to judge themselves for being self-critical, because in a way they're trying to just keep themselves safe. They're trying to say, hey, there's a problem here. I need to attend to this problem because there may be danger. The problem, however, is that this system evolved, watch out for crocodiles, you gotta run, there's a crocodile. And now it's like, oh, my genes don't fit properly anymore, right? So the threats we feel are threats to our self-esteem, they aren't actual threats. And the double whammy of self-criticism is you're both the attacker and the attacked. Okay, so when you are criticizing yourself, you're releasing a lot of cortisol, the stress hormone, adrenaline makes you jittery, nervous, etc., triggering your amygdala. But again, a very natural system. This is part of being human. But there's also a physiological underpinning to self-compassion, right? What makes humans different from reptiles is we have in our biology a caregiving system, right? Crocodiles are happy to just let their babies wander off to the wild and maybe they'll eat them, right? There's not that sense of an attachment bond. But as mammals, we have physiologically the ability to both soothe and be soothed. It's built into us. Think about, a crying baby. When the crying baby is rocked and held and comforted by the mother, that baby actually calms down. Again, we're also programmed to try to soothe others in times of distress. There's a whole theory about the tend and befriend system, that we aren't just competitive evolutionarily, that humans were able to be so successful because of social cooperation, etc. So all of this is natural as well. And there's evidence of what happens when you give yourself compassion. They've actually done some studies of looking at people who are induced to be in a self-compassionate frame of mind, is it reduces cortisol levels and it releases oxytocin and other opiates. And oxytocin is kind of the feel-good, feel-safe hormone, right? So when you give yourself compassion, you're actually changing your physiology in a way that you feel safe, more secure, and less stressed out by the self-criticism. All right, so another question a lot of people ask me is self-compassion related to compassion for others? And this is actually a very new area of research. And what we're finding based on some very recent research is yes. The answer is yes. So people who are more compassionate, have more compassion for others, more empathy for others. They're more likely to have values of altruism, to engage in more helping behavior. They're more likely to do perspective taking. Part of that's that common humanity piece of self-compassion. More likely to see things, step in someone else's shoes, see it from their point of view. More likely to forgive others. And also we've got some nice data looking at how self-compassionate people act in romantic relationships, and their partners rate self-compassionate people as much more giving, supportive, less critical, less dominant, and people who have self-compassionate partners report being much more satisfied in their relationship, okay, because they're getting more from their partners. There's actually, I don't know if any of you have read my book. At the time I wrote my book, we've done a lot of research lately with older populations. Among younger populations, young adults, we actually find there's more of a discrepancy between how people treat themselves and treat others. And in fact, among the undergraduates we studied, there's no relationship between self-compassion and compassion for others. And we don't know exactly why this is yet, but my suspicion is that when you're really young and you're forming your identity, it's very hard. You haven't had the life experience to really understand this common humanity component, understand why you're worthy of compassion just like others. And I think with age, development, and wisdom, and more suffering, and more relationships, you start changing your perspective. And as the more you open your heart to yourself, the more you also open your heart to others. All right, so, and this is where we get to caregivers, right? Caregivers, of course, want to have compassion for others. Oftentimes the reason people go into a caregiving profession is because they feel compassion for others. They want to help. They want to do good in the world. But as you know, there's a lot of issues with caregivers. Oftentimes they get burnt out. They just can't take it after a while. They give and they give and they give, and after a while they just feel drained. Okay, I think that self-compassion is very important for caregivers for a few reasons. One of them actually is that self-compassion allows us to hold suffering. One of the problems with people that deal with a lot of suffering is after a while you just want to turn your head away from it. It's too much to take in. It's too much to bear. And of course, no one trains us on how to hold suffering in compassionate awareness. But if you give yourself compassion, if you soothe yourself for the suffering you're experiencing by having empathy with the other person that's suffering, it actually gives you much more strength and resilience to just be there, to be with the person that's suffering. You don't have to turn away from it because you have the skill that allows you to be with it with an open heart. You know that the little, what do you call them, little cards you also have on airplanes, or the stewards and stewardesses say that if there's a plane crash or something goes wrong, an oxygen mask comes down, always put your own oxygen mask on before helping other people. And I think that's partly what self-compassion is doing. If you're constantly replenishing your own emotional resources through kindness, care, support, active self-soothing, that actually gives you more resources to then share with others. Okay, and it's the great thing about compassion, or you might say love, is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like we only have 100 units, and if I give 70 units to someone else, I only have 30 left for myself. It's unlimited. So the more unlimited compassion and care you give to yourself, the more, well, time's not unlimited, but the more you have in your heart to give to others. So it's really a win-win situation. There needs to be a lot more research on this, but there is a little bit. One thing, again, another thing that happens with self-compassion and being able to hold suffering is it reduces this effect of numbing out. You know, when you're around self-compassion a lot and you feel a lot of stress, oftentimes, this comes from trying to protect yourself. You just numb out, you just tune it out. But people who have more self-compassion, they have a lot less burnout and a lot less compassion fatigue. And they often report being a lot more satisfied with their caregiving role. Because again, they're able to be present with it and recharge our own emotional batteries. I have my own experience with caregiving, not as a healthcare professional, but as the parent of an autistic child. A few of you may have been at the movie last night. But luckily, I'm sure a lot of you have some experience with autism. It can be very traumatic. There's a lot of suffering, both for the child and for yourself dealing with it. Luckily, I had a very well-established meditation and self-compassion practice by the time my child was diagnosed. As a matter of fact, the day we got the official diagnosis, I was on my way to a meditation retreat. I was going to go that day. And I called my husband and said, I won't go. I'll come back and let's process this. And he said, no, I need you to go. I need you to go on this retreat. Be centered. Again, fill yourself up, and then come back and help me get through this. So we both took the approach in, again, turning towards the suffering, turning towards the autism, not trying to avoid it, not trying to just fix the problem. I mean, at first, of course, we were very motivated to just fix the problem. But as we opened ourselves more and more to his autism and him and the beautiful child he is, it allowed us to be with it as it was, and therefore take a very open-minded, open-hearted approach to dealing with his autism. Oh, there. So what I want to do, actually, is if you saw the film, I hate to repeat it, but a lot of you probably haven't seen the film. So I just wanted to show you a little trailer of the film we made that I think you'll get some sense of how self-compassion really helped us transform our relationship with our son's autism.
In April 2004, my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism. The feeling was like being hit across the face with a baseball bat.
Go back up again. Can we get more sound? Let's see if that works.
In April 2004, my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism. The feeling was like being hit across the face with a baseball bat. Our lives became clogged under a mountain of conflicting information on the disorder. We tried everything. He didn't speak to us. One day, he ran away from me and ran right up to a horse called Betsy. The moment I put Rowan on Betsy's back, he began to speak.
He's a nice horse.
As Rowan began to open up to me for the first time, a light bulb went on in my head. Was there a place on Earth that combined healing with horses? Mongolia. This is a story about how, as a family, we did something crazy. How we ended up going halfway across the world in search of a miracle.
I think it wasn't exactly Ron's vision of Mongolia.
We're going to go up a several thousand-foot mountain and perform a 4-hour ritual with shamans. Isn't that what all families do? Sometimes I think he's like leaping forward, and sometimes it's like he's totally regressing. I couldn't help wondering, did I really have his best interest at heart here?
I don't know how useful it is to think of us as normal and Rowan as the sick one.
And then something happened. Rowan began laughing, giggling. We were together again as a family. His autism forced me to listen to what interested him above all else. We're onto something good here.
So I could honestly say if I didn't have my self-compassion practice, I don't know how I would have gotten through it. I actually write a lot about it in my book. I was going to do a little reading, but we're short on time, so it made all the difference in the world. Partly because of that, I wanted to move beyond the realm of just researching self-compassion and actually figuring out how to teach people to be more self-compassionate. So first, I just want to say that mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is becoming an increasingly popular program, has been shown to increase self-compassion. And in fact, some of the research now coming out is that the increased self-compassion associated with taking the program is one of the reasons it actually reduces stress. Okay, so that's one avenue that's pretty widely available. This other program that Don briefly mentioned, I've developed with my colleague Chris Germer an 8-week program specifically designed to teach self-compassion skills. In MBSR, it's kind of implicit. It's talked about a little bit, but this is all 8 weeks of all self-compassion. It uses meditation, but also informal practices, group discussion, homework exercises. We just did our first randomized controlled study of the program, and the results came out great. It increased self-compassion, compassion for others, mindfulness, and greatly helped with well-being. So I'm very excited about the program. I just have a couple minutes, so I just want to very briefly give you guys a couple little tips maybe you could take in your daily life. One thing that really helped me, especially in a difficult situation like when Rowan was tantruming, is a self-compassion mantra that I developed for myself, but basically this is just phrases that you memorize that you can use when things get really tough. So the one I developed is this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need. So it really evokes all 3 components. And I encourage people, if this is something you want to practice, to come up with your own phrases that really speak to you, memorize them, and just, when things are really difficult, just say them to yourself. Remind yourself what you really want to be giving yourself. And then the other very easy practice is soothing touch, okay? Sometimes our minds are just too distressed, we can't go there, but remember, our body is designed physically with soothing touch to lower our cortisol levels and increase oxytocin, etc. So sometimes, it sounds kind of cliche, but really giving yourself a hug can make yourself physically feel better and then create the sense of calm safety needed to then change your self-talk. Obviously, you can't always hug yourself in public. It looks a bit funny. I tell people you can, if say you're in a tense work meeting, fold your arms. people have no idea that if the intention is to soothe and comfort yourself, it still works. And also putting your hands on your heart. Any physical gesture of affection, again, taps into that mammalian caregiving system. And it's something, yes, it is touchy-feely, but it works. So don't, it's an easy way to give yourself that little boost. And then just to close, I have a website, selfcompassion.org, and I've tried to make it very, very user-friendly. There's videos, you can test your own self-compassion level. All my research is on there. There's guided meditations, exercises. And in fact, a lot of counselors send their clients to the site. It's very user-friendly. So hopefully that will be a resource for you if you care to use it. And then I think we've got some time for questions. Yeah?
Thank you, Kristin. I'd like to maybe invite the people that are connected through telehealth, if you wanted to ask Kristin any question. I think we could hear you now, so if you want to ask your question. If not, we'll start with a person here, and we can connect you in later.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm Glendra Watt. I'm a general internist at this hospital. I was wondering whether you've noticed any gender differences in your research. I can't help but feel a bit outnumbered by women in this room, and it's very interesting that there are many less men at your lecture than there are women today. So I'm wondering if you've noticed that in your research.
Yeah, so the findings are inconsistent. I would say about half of the time we find that women actually have a little less self-compassion than men. They tend to be a little more self-critical. But the differences are small. And it's only, sometimes we find it, sometimes we don't. Women are very strong in this common humanity element, but for several reasons, they tend to be more self-critical and kind of run away with their emotions more. Partly there's physiological reasons, they're more likely to ruminate. Although there's very strong evidence, though, that women are more compassionate to others than men are. So what happens is sometimes you get more of a discrepancy between how women treat themselves and others than men do. And I think that's why this topic speaks to a lot of women.
Hi, Kristin. I'm really interested in your 8-week program, and I have to admit I don't know anything about it. But I'm wondering how you think or how you expect, I guess given that it's in early stages, how it's going to differ from the 8-week MBSR program in terms of its outcomes.
Right. Well, we designed the program to be a complement to MBSR. You need at least 8 weeks to teach mindfulness, and you need mindfulness and self-compassion. So we teach a little bit of mindfulness, just like MBSR teaches some self-compassion. But you can only fit so much in 8 weeks. So we aren't at all in competition with MBSR. In fact, my ideal would be that people would take both. I do think, though, that when it comes to things like anxiety, depression, etc., that the self-compassion element is perhaps even that much more powerful. There's some research suggesting that the mindfulness itself is very good for a lot of being able to pay attention, be able to stay on target, being able not to suppress your thoughts is very powerful for that. But we're actually going to do a trial comparing MBSR and MSC program. And I suspect that for some outcomes, for the well-being outcomes, that our program may be even more powerful. And then for some other outcomes, like more cognitive outcomes, MBSR may be more powerful. So we'll just have to see. I also think different personality types are going to be drawn to one or the other. A lot of people, they aren't drawn to mindfulness meditation, but they might beat themselves up and think, I need a little self-compassion. So I think that's going to be a big difference as well. But yeah, it's very interesting. We'll find out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Just want to give an opportunity to those connected through telehealth. If you have any questions. people see. Did you see Kristin?
Oh, hello. So there are people out there watching. I thought that maybe no one was on the line. It's hard to, raise your hand in front of a whole classroom, isn't it?
I wanted to just remind everyone we've circulated some forms for you to give us your thoughts on what you experienced today, and also to provide us with any further ideas on the next Compassion Grand Round. So we invite you to give us your comments, and I'll invite Dawn to say the last few words.
Thank you so much, Kristin, for taking the leap of faith and traveling all the way here to Winnipeg based on a simple request. We're very honored that you've come. And thank you to everyone. I think the notion of filling our brains with some of the thoughts and research around what we know is true in our hearts is a compelling thing to have done for us. And I'm very glad to have my head filled with love as well as my heart. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you to everyone. If you're interested in more of the Compassion Project information, there is a form that you can fill out to get on our mailing list. So thank you all for your time and energy and presence today.
And just to remind you, I'll be selling books and signing them if you're interested. And I also have a few copies of the Horseboy book and the Horseboy film if any of you are interested in that.